I'm Dave Laird.
I'm Matt Booker.
And I'm Chris Villa. I consume libraries and I wear out spines here in the Great Concavity.
Yes, you do, Chris.
Cool.
You are a book consuming prodigy, I guess I could say, which is why you're here to discuss Wallace and other books with us here on episode 58. Welcome to the show, Chris. It's great to have you, man.
Thank you guys so much. This is a real privilege.
Oh,
so Chris, if people don't know, is the host, producer, the guy behind the Leaf by Leaf YouTube channel, which I think launched about a year ago, a little over a year ago, something like that.
Yeah, a year and a half ago.
And it's just done gangbusters. Like, you've gotten just absolute great reception, and everything you post, it seems like you get like 100, 200, 300 comments in there.
Yeah,
and
I was scrolling through some today, and like great traction with folks, and people who are really wanting to dig into talking about these books with you. So,
and literary like video shows in the past have not done well. Like they've had some, I'm just being honest, and and I think one thing that makes your show really great is that you're not trying to sell anything. You're not trying to get to 1 million subscribers and do this full time. It's your passion project. And your passion, I think, is what keeps people watching the whole video. And I think also your literary taste is important because, again, that's why we have you here. I think we have a lot of overlap with our tastes. And, when you meet someone and they can just say, like, oh, I loved it that you talked about this one book. And you're like, oh, man, I got even more to say about that. Like, you just kind of fall into that routine. And it's like, what about this guy? What about this guy? I remember seeing a live video performance one time of Stevie Nicks and Tori Amos, and like they were playing the piano together, and they were just so excited to be like, oh, play this song, play that, and they compared it to being like two little girls like trading their favorite like fingernail polish colors, like, oh, this is my color and this is another color, and I kind of feel that way like whenever I meet someone out in the real world, because I'm going out to bars and restaurants all the time and meeting new people.
We're doing that a lot these days.
I left this house in like 10 months, but no, when you meet someone and wherever it is, and they're like, not just Infinite Jest and David Foster Wallace, but all the other stuff that we'll get to that you've talked about, it feels really special. And so people keep coming back to your channel, I think, to get more of that because their taste aligns with yours. So that's not really a question for you.
It's really more of a comment.
Keep telling me about the success of my channel. I'm enjoying it.
So it's just you, right? If for people who haven't seen it, let me just back up and say, unlike our show where we get all of this time-wasting banter, you do not waste time, and you don't really have interviews that I've seen. It's really just you talking about you did one episode where you took questions from the people sent in questions. Right. But I think, tell us a little bit about the genesis of the show. I know you've talked about it on your show, but here for our listeners who haven't heard that, just, how did you get into doing this and want to create this channel?
And I would say, too, before you start, Chris, if you haven't seen Chris's Leaf by Leaf Instagram account and you're not like driving or something or like operating, heavy machinery at the moment, open Instagram, go to Leaf by Leaf, and check out this room that Chris records his videos in. It's your home library, like all custom built-in bookshelves. It is the most glorious home library I think I've ever witnessed, like on all of the internet or anywhere I've ever been. It is just, it's a shrine to books. It's so fantastic. So go look at that just to get the context of what Chris is about to say.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm gonna have to presume that you've never seen Umberto Eco's library then for you to say that.
I don't think I have, no.
Okay, good. Well, go look at that and then
Google imaging now.
there's a famous story of Echo. People would come into his library and be like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, have you read all of these books?" And he said his go-to answer was either, he would usually say, "Oh, this and many more," or something like that. Of like, "Oh yeah, this and many more."
Sure. And I'll also say,
yes.
Matt, you said something, you made the point that I don't do interviews, and it brought up something that's kind of humorous and people will probably get a kick out of, because by an amazing series of circumstances that all began with starting this YouTube channel, I found myself on the phone with Michael Silverblatt of Bookworm, which was amazing. The first time we talked, I kind of sat there with my tongue glued to the roof of my mouth while he spoke. But it was funny because he said to me, he said, "Now I heard that you have this show." He was like, "Tell me, how do you do your interviews?" And I said, "Well, they're actually not interviews." And I said, "I just tell people about the books that I really like." And he said, "No, I know, but how do you do the recording? Do you and the author get on Skype or whatever?" And I was like, "Oh no, there's no author. It's literally just me." And it blew his mind to think, he can't fathom that some guy is out there just sitting in front of a camera all by himself. It was it's probably more.
It's funny because I have also talked to Michael Silverblatt as a result of this show, and
I have not.
He did not seem too interested in my recording setup at all. And I do talk to Michael, so now I'm going to have to give him a call back and be like, "Just so you know, we got this new thing called Riverside."
Yeah, there you go. Just tell him that
I'm sure he wanted to talk about John Barth. He wanted to talk about.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say you can just tell him you read some John Barth recently and want to talk to him about it. Yeah. So anyway, the genesis of this channel, it's actually very ironic because for a long time, I kind of, stuck my nose up at social media, even though I'm a little bit complicit because I've been working full time in professional information technology since I was 15, and say 21 years now, and in software development and web development nonetheless. And maybe because of that, by the time I go home, I don't even want to look at a screen. I just want to look at books. So, but for a while, I don't have a lot of people in my immediate life with whom I can talk about the literature that I like, and as obsessively. I was going to say deeply, but obsessively is probably more accurate. And but it's just this like tension, within me that's almost like it needs to come out somehow. And I remember being on lunch break with a couple of friends, and over a coffee, I was boring them. I honestly think that I was reading passages from A Naked Singularity, because I was reading A Naked Singularity at the time, and there are passages in there that are so hysterical that I can barely get through them reading them silently or aloud without real belly laughs, not typing LOL, but really LOLing. And I was reading that to him, and one of them said, "Dude, will you please just create a YouTube channel or something?" And I had never even thought of that. Like that, YouTube and literature. I mean, this is like opposite ends of the spectrum to me. I mean, I didn't even know that there were people doing what I now know is playfully called BookTube. But at the time, that is not something that ever crossed my mind. And so I went out there, and they said, "Oh yeah, there are all kinds of channels. And there are channels for everything." They said there are channels of people rubbing feathers on microphones, and people, love this stuff. And I thought, what? So, YouTube has been this really weird world for me because I just never really got on it. And so I said, okay, I'm going to try to look for a book review. And what was it? It was, Harry Mulisch, The Discovery of Heaven. And I thought, let me see if anyone does anything like in this vein. And I typed in, Harry Mulisch, Discovery of Heaven, and a channel by none other than Paper Bird came up. Paper Bird, by the way, he lives in Austin, Texas, and his channel is really something else. It's like the David Lynch of book reviews, is the best way I can describe it.
I just finished Eraserhead last night, and
Oh,
That's a haunting description.
Yeah. So I saw that and I thought, you know what? Why not? And so the very first video that's out there is from, I think, June 2018, 2019. And it's of Jim Gower's novel Explosives, which is also now really interesting because now the second edition is coming out. And as a result of starting that channel, I now have written the afterword for it, which is still unthinkable. But that was sort of the genesis. Is I just, it was all sort of serendipitous. The lunch break with the friend who told me to, exhorted me to do that, and I went and looked, and someone had something that sparked my interest, and I said, okay, I'll throw something out there. So the first couple, I think the second one was Douglas Hofstadter's Le Tombeau de Marot, in praise of the music of language, and then I just started reading little things and learned that, it's better if you are actually on the camera. Well, hello. We have a special guest here.
We have a special guest on the Great Concavity this week. It's Flannery Isabel Laird. Do you want to say hi, Fee?
Hi.
Flannery.
That's Chris. That's my friend
Did
Chris.
You say Flannery?
And that's my friend Matt. Flannery, yep.
Flannery.
Like Flannery O'Connor.
Very
That's
nice.
Right.
She's also a problematic author. No offense to
Yeah, apparently. Just in.
Going back to novel Explosives, because you brought it up, I do think that is your first video on there. I discovered that book through Michael Silverblatt's show, KCRW.
Yep,
Bookworm,
me too.
And we had Jim on the show. I read the book, fell in love with it, and he came on our show. And actually, in 2019, came to Austin and came to our little meetup we had here in Austin. We got to meet him and hang out with him.
And Meredith, his wife, had dinner together. It's great.
And we also the friend of the show who we haven't mentioned yet, but again crosses paths with Jim and Michael Silverblatt is Stephen Moore, and I know you've had some back and forth with Stephen Moore, as have we. Yeah. And like I say, I've gotten the privilege of hanging out with Steve when he came here to the Ransom Center to work on the Alexander Theroux book, and I got to spend a day with him digging through some archives.
Wow.
Which is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I want to say, okay, once you committed to doing it, then, if people scroll back through all your videos and look, there's a couple things that jumps out. One, like Dave said, your setup is amazing with all the shelves. I wish that I had that space. Yeah. Two is that we could track your hair, right? Like, 'cause you can just see like where you get a haircut. It stands out, and it's like, oh, Chris got a haircut. But see, we don't get that from the podcast world because, thank God, people don't have to look at me.
They don't see us very often, unless we post like a picture of us on Twitter or Instagram or something, which is pretty rare.
But a lot of people just hate the sound of their own voice, and I think the being on video is like that times 100, like doubles that sort of anxiety about appearance and how do I look. Plus, people are going to comment on your appearance, like even in passing, even in jest like that. There's a lot of people who it's like, and now I just delete my whole channel and I'm just disappear into the night.
Yeah, it's there is a whole, and I won't digress on this because it doesn't really have anything to do with anything, but yeah, there is a whole slew of new dimensions and details that I never thought that I would even think of and worry about. And especially when I decided to make the investment in some upgraded equipment, and suddenly everybody can see that there are indeed lines appearing on my forehead. And things like that. And the sound of my voice really isolated from the noise. It can kind of get, when I was just doing the onboard mic before investing in one, it could, little pieces of it could get buried under the ambient noise. And now it's just like right there in an isolated box with the listener's ear. And to me, it makes me recoil. But anyway,
it's hard to get over that. It took me a long time. The self-loathing eventually declines a little bit. Don't worry.
Yeah. Once I had to cut the hair after doing that. Then I lost some viewers, got some new ones.
Well, even people commenting on your shelves, I find striking but not unsurprising because, like if you go over to someone's house and let's say you don't know them that well and they have tons of books, if you're like us, I just want to go over to the books and let's talk about that. Like,
books and records,
got that book. Like if you have these books, it says a lot about, it's like your brain turned inside out.
Yes.
And to be able to do that, your videos that are like your bookshelf tours, I think are some of your most popular ones, where you just kind of go through like, here's literary criticism, here's poetry, here's philosophy. Tell us a little bit about how or why you wanted to do those.
People demand them of you.
It's requested.
It is really hilarious.
They want a play-by-play of what exactly is on your shelf.
Yeah, and it's part of that. They vicariously want to peruse my shelves, and so that's why, of course, I don't appear in those videos because I'm trying to make it as POV as possible. But I've talked to other people now. I've talked to some other booktubers. Offline, and they say the same thing. They're like, I get bombarded with requests for bookshelf tours. And I think that's it. It's that same phenomenon that you're talking about when you go over to someone's house. I mean, I'll go over to someone's house and they will clearly have books that an interior designer turned sideways so that the spines don't show. And I'll go and start perusing those, trying to get my head between the lamp and the wall, looking at them. And because it interests you. Like, what did they read? Have I read that before? Is that one that I need? And I can't tell you how many times I've posted a new video and people have commented like, yeah, that's great. When's the next bookshelf tour?
It's a pretty good window into someone's personhood, right? Like seeing their book collection,
Sure. And I do believe it is an extension of my consciousness.
Totally, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And that the fact that you don't appear in those videos reminds me of a really funny comedian guy I like named Ed Bassmaster, and he did this funny video where he's doing a review of the new iPhone, but he's using the iPhone to shoot the video. So he's like, it's got but he doesn't realize that you can't see it's hilarious.
That's genius.
He's hilarious.
Going back to your shelves, I mean, there's a really basic thing that just like from a distance people can see, the big books stick out, and so like you also have a lot of series about like which like big books you recommend, your top 10, or which big books you haven't been able to conquer. A lot of them were the same ones for me. I was just looking at like the beginning of pandemic, I really wanted to read Alan Moore's Jerusalem, and I sent a copy to my brother Josh, and we were like, let's both read this. And like the edition I have, the type is just super tiny, and I spent like an hour reading like 2 pages of it, and I was like, you know what, I just need a different hobby today. Like it's not a fun hobby. But those, let's talk about the affinity for large books, and like I'm trying to lead this into a discussion of Infinite Jest.
Sure.
Because you have taken the time to prepare for this interview by going back and rereading, I believe for the second time, Infinite Jest. So why don't we just say like your top 10 books, how does Infinite Jest fit into those other mega novels? And how did you first come across it, et cetera, et cetera?
So big books. I actually have I always want to say reader demand, but people don't read my YouTube channel. So by viewer demand, a lot of people ask, can you make a video on reading big books and what's your approach and all this? So I do have a video out there on that. I don't dare go and rewatch my videos, so who knows really what it says at this point.
After you finish editing, they're like, you never want to look at them again. Yeah.
Once I've edited the thing and put it out there, that's it. And sometimes people will comment something very specific, and I hope that they, if they don't timestamp it, then I have to go and try and find it. But anyway, for me, I do love big tomes.
That's very apparent from your channel. Yeah.
There is.
Are we kindred spirits, hey?
Sure, man. And for me, it's like a relationship. And I found out really early on in my life that I'm the type of guy who loves a serious, committed relationship. And I knew that I was going to probably end up getting married really young. And I did. I got married when I was 20, and I'm still married.
Oh, wow.
To that same woman. So 15 years now.
Yeah.
And
congrats.
Yeah, thank you. And but I like that. I like the long game, I guess you could say. And I'm drawn to commitment and challenge. And so that's that, psychologically, I think that plays into it, but in a more literary mode, for me, and still conflating it with the trope of a relationship. For me, the longer, denser, more complex books force us, by convention, by their very nature, they force us to spend more time with them. Mm-hmm. I can't fly through it. And in fact, it was funny. I told you guys, give me 3 weeks to read Infinite Jest. And boy, was I off. I thought, if I just hunkered, and I forgot that Infinite Jest too, I read it in the Back Bay paperback. And I forgot that because of its actual dimensions and the font size is a little smaller and the dimensions of the books are a little bigger, 20 pages is more like 40 pages of a normal book. Yeah. So anyway, it just really forces me to slow down and not consume too quickly. And which is actually part of, a big point that David Foster Wallace is trying to make in the book about our natures of wanting to hit those P terminals as two characters talk about it. And I find that I can really, that's the rat reference. P that one got me the first time I read it 10 years ago. And then the second time I read it, it was that always stuck with me, that little scene. And, that's part of the stuff that Michael Peach didn't really like. Michael Peach, of course, being David Foster, the editor of Infinite Jest. And he talked a lot about, he wanted that whole, dimension of the political Onan taken out, and the mountainside bits with Marat and Steeply. But anyway, that really strikes a nerve, that we are driven to hit those pleasure terminals fatally, just like with the lab rats would find that button rigged up to stimulating their pleasure terminals, and they would hit it until they would die. And
the Canadians in Manitoba are lined up around the corner to version. Is it Manitoba?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as far as I remember, that was based on actual studies that David Foster Wallace had come across. But, so for me, I can chew through a lot of smaller books. And don't get me wrong, there are lots of short books that are, that do touch at the sublime and are beautiful. Mm-hmm. I have a video, I talk about some of them, Marilyn Robinson's Housekeeping being one that resonated deeply with me. James Salter, Light Years, Anne Carson's autobiography of Red. There are plenty of very striking and deep, resonant short books. But I find that for me, that long game of a big book drawing me in, not just because of the time it takes to read it, but the structure. People who are doing these big tomes like Infinite Jest, they're usually doing way more than just putting words on a page. They are trying to do a total work of art with every element of the book. So the structure, the form, the content, all of it. And
they're imposing a universe on you.
Yeah.
Right? Not just like a room or two. They're like, here's this entire well-realized world that I've created, and you have to countenance that.
Right. You have to grapple with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and so you start to, the book starts to, that's when you really start to, as Harold Bloom would say, the book really starts to read you more than you read it. And I didn't really understand what he meant by that when he would first talk about it, of course, with Shakespeare, being that Shakespeare reads us better than we can read ourselves and better than we can read Shakespeare. And I never really got that until I started slowing down with these large books. And then I realized how much they have anticipated a lot of thoughts that we have on a daily basis. Like a lot of these people who have engaged in these deep total novels have anticipated and encapsulated and articulated all of these thoughts that you see in little sound bites and listicles, as they're humorously called, these, because people are too busy to read articles anymore. So you have to make lists. So listicles, these things have already been well trod. You'll find when you read these big books. I don't know if any of this is coherent, but
Well, let me ask you: reading Infinite Jest this second time around, and immersing yourself in it, because one thing I've learned from your videos too is that you're super thorough, and that comes to not just preparing to read something while you're reading it. You make word lists, and then after you've read it, go and make the video and write the review and do all of this. And so I feel like you really give a book your undivided attention in some ways, or at least attention. And whenever you were reading Infinite Jest this time around, after a break in years and after having this YouTube channel and sort of seeing the world a little bit differently and being a little bit older, what was different for you?
Yeah, that's a great question.
What struck you differently? What did you enjoy more?
The first thing all right, so for context for everyone, I first read Infinite Jest when I was 25. And I came to it because somehow I don't remember how, but I came into contact with his mega popular essay, a supposedly fun thing I'll never do again. And I remember reading that. I'd never read anything like that in my life. I mean, it was hysterical. This just casual but hyper intelligent, hyper aware, but really humorous guy. I don't care for cruises myself, so a lot of it really hit with me. And so I ended up getting the collection. I guess someone may have sent me a PDF or something. I don't know if that's incriminating, saying something like that, but anyway, I went and bought the paperback. And then I found that he had the David Lynch essay, and I love David Lynch. And so I thought, oh, this is perfect. And then of course, it wouldn't be long before, Infinite Jest, would be in front of my face. But when I first came to it, it was a really different experience because, first of all, I did not know that he had committed suicide. I did not know really much about him at all. I hadn't seen the clips of him with Charlie Rose. I hadn't read anything except for David Lynch and A Supposedly Fun Thing. And I think I may have known that he was somehow in acquaintance with Jonathan Franzen, of whose work I had only read the corrections at that time. So I really didn't know anything. And that I really like that experience. It's really hard to come by anymore. Of course, once you start getting into things and you start reading lots of literary criticism and literary studies and anthologies and things like that, you can't help but come into contact with things about the authors. So by the time you get to the books, they're books that you haven't read, you at least know some of the main, most salient facts about those writers. But the first time I read Infinite Jest, I knew nothing of David Foster Wallace. I hadn't read the D.T. Max biography, which I can't remember when that came out. Was that
2012, I think.
2012. Okay, so yeah, I certainly hadn't. Well, I was just shy of it then because I think it was the end of 2010, beginning of 2011 when I first read it. But again, I didn't know anything. So when I came to it, I found it, like a lot of people, and this took David Foster Wallace off guard, but I thought it was hilarious. I thought, here's this hyper intellectual guy who can also play at any role on stage. He is inhabiting every type of character, and I just saw it as, man, and having known that he had played at journalism with the two essays I had read, I thought, man, this guy is just like a mirror. He just reflects whatever he's looking at, but in a really fun way, kind of like being in Barth's Funhouse, right? And so that's the way I approached it. Now this second time, now here it's 10 years later. I have a 9-year-old daughter. Things have ratcheted up at my job to where, lots more responsibilities and so on. And now I know the ins and outs. I know now that he was an extremely, I don't really want to say disturbed. That makes it sound a little too much, but troubled. Yeah. Thank you. He was an extremely troubled person. And that's something I did not realize before. And there's a lot, in my family, there's anxiety, panic, depression, things like that. And, I've become, in the ages from 25 to 36, I've become more acutely aware of some of the trials that can impose. And especially when you combine it with David Foster Wallace's, penchant for obsessive compulsive behaviors and things like that, to then read this book. And of course, knowing that he committed suicide, that it just got too much, to now read the book through that lens, to be honest with you, after about page 68, when we first come into contact with Kate Gumpert, I had to put the book aside for a few days, because he renders the experience from the inside of Kate Gompert's mind in such a realistic way, to where it actually disturbed me. It bothered me. It was real, and it has been a long time since I've read something that felt real, that really struck me. It went beyond the bounds of just the imagination, just the author setting these words on the page and then me taking them in and rousing my imagination. This went deeper, and it became real. So I had to put it aside for a few days. And then when I felt ready to pick it back up, then coming into contact and facing this counterpoise of Hal Incandenza, who we're starting to see, the beginnings of his addiction and trying to break free, and then sort of the end, the beginnings of his descent and the beginnings of Don Gately's ascent. This just became so real to me. It is not the way that I'm going to describe it in my video is that this is not now, to me, David Foster Wallace preening for us, but this is his attempt to purge himself. I really felt like all the way through, he is attempting to purge a sickness from himself through these pages, and also in the midst of that, find a cure, which could be as simple as what he calls these banalities, these platitudes that you hear about in AA. I think that in summary describes the biggest difference for me.
That's really interesting. I don't know if I've heard anyone put it exactly that way.
Yeah, I like that.
So I find that really intriguing. And one difference that I've noted over the years is like very few people will say like, "Oh, the corrections by Jonathan Franzen saved my life," or even like reading 2666 is a favorite book of mine. It's like very few people would say, "Oh, that book saved my life." But like with Infinite Jest, a lot of people do, or they say that book changed my life. And it made me, deal with some other problem that I had in my life. And I think it's interesting because of a lot of the characters in the book who, like you say, get what is the solution? What is the salvation?
Right.
Is often arrives via like epiphany, which I find to be kind of a lazy storytelling technique, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's come under fire. I've seen more and more stuff about that. Like that was pretty hot in like the early in the aughts and stuff, and now it's like, okay, we need a little bit more than like a moment of realization.
Right, and the same with the Pale King. But I think the exception to that is really Gately, who he's making a conscious decision every day to try to stay sober.
Yep.
And this is also where, like, you can see some of Wallace now, knowing what you knew, and like we've mentioned this on the show before, but like whenever he died, I'd been a huge fan of his for a decade or more when he died, and I had no idea that he was a depressive himself. I had no idea that he was on medication for it. I had no idea that he was actually in AA. And that was still the era of like oversharing and people writing memoirs, and they very easily could have hinted or alluded to some of his own troubles, and he didn't. He put that into the fiction. So reading the fiction again, you're exactly right, that it's almost impossible to read this book and not see a tortured soul
exactly.
at work. And it's really sad to see him struggling to put this out and not really getting a response that I think is at that same level. A lot of people were just like, oh, this guy is just showing off, like you're saying, of like, oh, he's just showing off, and it's like, I don't think so. The other question I have for you is actually in the total opposite direction, because I have never played a game of tennis in my life, not a big tennis fan, and
this book got me into tennis. Like I became pretty
Chris,
fanatical,
I know, plays tennis because you mentioned in your, I believe your This Is Water video that every time you would play tennis, you'd be thinking about, tennis wise, how, what is your tennis biography, and how does that line up with reading this book?
It's to say that I play tennis. Yeah, this will be the most uninteresting response I can
segment of
you.
The evening.
Yeah, really, I assure you.
Not to me, man. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I assure you that playing tennis is not an integral part of my life in any way, and it is very, very much just a hobby and something I do for exercise. And I don't know. I've never had a single lesson. I've never even tried to look into improving anything. It's just something I go out there and run around and swing around and do. But I think it may not be so much the tennis that triggers David Foster Wallace as the level of sweat in which I'm drenched when I'm done with it.
That's
are you talking about reading Infinite Jest?
Yeah.
Playing tennis
So I wish I had a better answer, but it's really so. I'll tell you this: I use tennis as a means to stop thinking. So it's sort of goes in the.
Shut off the
I think
brain
he did the
voice
same
for
thing.
a bit.
But going back to the reread of it, were there parts of it, I assume, because you hadn't read it in 10 years or so, that you had forgotten about?
Like huge swaths.
Between
reads for me, like
one thing that became another thing that I love about big books in this vein is that they're made to be reread. They really are.
They really reward the reread. Yeah.
Exponentially. Last year I found myself. I not only got to reread Infinite Jest thanks to you guys inviting me onto the show, but I also got to reread JR and the Recognitions because of the NYRB reissue. And I also got to reread Novel Explosives because of Jim Gower asking me to do the afterword.
Right. I'd like to do that soon, actually, give it a reread.
Oh, every single one of them that I just mentioned, they're made to be reread again and again. And for me, that's a plus. I do understand the notion that because that can sometimes be construed as saying, well, why should I bother to read this huge book and expend all this energy if I already know that I have to read it twice? You know what I mean? I can see how that might defeat the appeal to think that, because it almost kind of sounds like the first time you read it, it's just a throwaway. But Proust actually talked about this in his epic, and he talked about how what's lacking the first time that we encounter a piece of music or a piece of literature or a work of art is memory, the memory of it. And so the reason we can constantly get more out of, the types of those aforementioned forms that he was talking about, the more that we load them into memory, the more we'll get out of them. And so the first time you come to something like Infinite Jest, you have no memory of it, and that's a tautology, but you see what I'm saying. So, yeah, I mean, what did I not remember? What did I see for the first time, as it were? I mean, 90% of the book, probably. It was amazing.
Were there any really standout epiphanies where you were like, "Oh,
yes,
that's a really great early clue that I couldn't have caught the first time"?
One in particular comes very early on page 31 of the Back Bay paperback. This is when James Incandenza is disguised as a woman, I believe, and talking to his son, Hal. And
the professional conversationalist scene?
Yeah. Yes, that's it. And Hal already knows that it's him. But it's just right before you get this great onomatopoeia for slurping down some Sprite or something, some kind of soda.
The Millennial Fizzy, I think.
Yeah, the Schlugs. Right before that, James Incandenza throws in this thing, and he says, he goes, "I say again, identical to the gyroscopic balance sensor and mise-en-scène appropriation card and priapistic entertainment cartridge implanted in your very own towering father's anaplastic cerebrum." And I didn't catch that the first time, but here we have the very first mention of something implanted in James Incandenza's head, which of course, as we move on, will become more and more intriguing. What exactly is in there? And then we'll find out how it is that he committed suicide and what that has to do with the internal pieces of his head. And then, of course, reading the Hamlet-inspired graveyard scene toward the end was a real treat. I mean, this scene when the Wraith is visiting Don Gately as he and Hal, though not proximally close, are both in a horizontal position. There are all of a sudden this whole web of connections starts to converge. And that Wraith-driven graveyard scene is as powerful for me as the late scene in the Recognitions. My favorite scene in the Recognitions, toward the end, when the writer finds Wyatt cloistered within the monastery, scraping away at a painting, and he's talking about how he has passed all the scientific tests. And, basically this to me is that he has, through art, triumphed over science. But anyway, that's the Recognitions. But just to say, it's as powerfully drawn as that scene. Certainly both of those things stood out. The Kate Gompert, the level at which that is expressed, of course, hit me. And then the whole scene, and I think I said something about this on Goodreads as I was reading along and posted something, and people immediately asked for the page numbers. But the whole scene right before Gately, I'm trying not to give things away here too for some readers, but
you can spoil it.
Okay, yeah, and I don't know how much it'll spoil it, but right before Gately, gets shot and ends up in going to the hospital, that whole scene of him trying to manage the recovery house and the whole midnight Boston changing the cars to the other side of the street, that whole scene all the way through, I think it's something like 8 pages long. That that can be taken out and excerpted. And I dare say that is one of the greatest ways to acquaint yourself with the goodness of David Foster Wallace's writing, because it has everything in it in that one episode.
And some of that language was stolen from Thomas Harris. I don't know if you know the story, but
Thomas Harris.
The language, the Silence of the Lambs, the Red Dragon.
You're right.
The description of the gun that the Nuck has, and like it's lifted word for word from Red Dragon.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
I had no idea.
This is in a post from. I've written it up. I didn't discover this. Someone else discovered this on our Wallace L mailing list years ago. But I did a thing for the original Infinite Summer in 2009 about influences on Infinite Jest and places where he had just lifted wholesale lines or paragraphs from other writers, including Mary Carr. He had stolen quite a bit from the Liars Club, especially about the Tommy Ducey character, the guy with the hair lip, and he collects snakes, a drug dealer. That dude is straight out of the Liars Club, even named the same thing. And
Tommy Ducey, really?
But anyways, one of the other ones is a description of Red Dragon, the gun, and it's really well written. So, if anything, this is a plug to go back and read some Thomas Harris.
Yeah, interesting.
Silence of the Lambs, the Red Dragon. That guy can actually really write. There's another one that's kind of funny that I made up or put in there that is the influence of. There's a scene where Mario is talking about. Hal tells Mario there's two ways to like lower the flag. One is to lower it, and the other one is to make the flagpole twice as high. Mm-hmm. And I just have the image of like Mario's like this tall, jumping on a flagpole. It's like Super Mario Brothers at the end of the level. And I was like, it's gotta be a Mario Brothers reference.
That's pretty good.
That just brought back fond memories of childhood and trying as hard as I could to leap over that flagpole.
More than 5,000 points. Is it possible?
So, but all that to say, I agree with you, especially about that scene at the halfway house where alternate side of the street parking, just what madness and chaos, and like to render it into, and some of those sentences are like, half a page long.
Yes.
It's like a 100-word sentence.
Love it.
And there's a great thing. I don't know if we've linked to it before, but it's on kottke.org of a guy who posted this on Wallace List, and then Jason Kottke got permission to repost it. It's called Building Sentences with David Foster Wallace. And it kind of walks you through, like, let's take one of these giant sentences and start at the bottom with an idea. Mm-hmm. An idea is like, and the sentence that he uses for this essay is about Mario being the one who directed his own play, video, the puppet show.
Yeah.
And by the time you're like, okay, now let's throw in a little bit of adverbs. Let's do a little bit. By the time you get to it, the sentence is actually like 150 words, something crazy. But it starts with just the idea that, like, even though Mario had some help, it was really, his foot on the treadle of the editing suite at the end. Like, that's the idea. And now let's watch him build it. And so what you're saying, I think that scene is like, it's a word building exercise.
Oh, it really is. Yeah.
Firing on all cylinders.
And the other thing is I love gratuity. And the thing is, it's not even really gratuitous either, because the entire thing is building up our love and admiration for Don Gately. You're rooting for this guy, because anyone else, I'm telling you, I was sitting there reading it and I was just thinking, if I had to do the stuff that he's having to do, I'd be gone. I'd hang it up and be gone. And so, of course, your first time through, you don't know what's getting ready to happen. And so he really, it also does a really good job developing that character and developing our feelings for Gately, as if they weren't already, high enough.
Mm-hmm, totally.
that scene is also the dead center of the novel. And so you look at the way that the novel is constructed, how much editing and moving things around to get to that point to say, okay, by page whatever, 600, we have to get Gately shot.
Unbelievable. How about that?
It's pretty impressive. Like,
you're right.
Editing project, and the one of the people who helped on the editing of this book was our good old friend Stephen Moore, right? And initially there were different sections. The opening section really of the whole book was that professional conversationalist scene, and to me, when you brought that up, was something about the inability of family members to really connect and to really be able to communicate, which is also a theme in his first book, Broom of the System. And, I wanted to get your opinion on some of those other kind of broader themes maybe that stood out to you. The humor one is big. A lot of, I think, really smart readers call it a funny book. So you're in good company there.
Chagrin.
I jotted down some themes here that really stood out. The theme of trying to be hyper present and hyper aware, in the moment, which is, there's a lot of philosophies, especially Eastern philosophies. And, I've since found that he was very interested in Buddhism and other things like that. But also the other edge of it, which too much hyper awareness and too much hyper presence, or too much consciousness, let's say, too much awareness of being conscious, which is one of these sort of recursions that come up with David Foster Wallace all over the place, can also lead to paralysis, kind of like what he talks about, another platitude from AA, analysis paralysis. But, fathers impacting sons. I think the first time I read it, I did not realize in the one scene in the garage, and it's a flashback to like the 1960s, and it's and it's actually James Incandescence's father. So it's the grandfather, Mario. Of Hal. Right. And I did not realize that the first time I read it. I thought, this is another bizarre clip like what we get with Poor Tony or something, just this little quick interspersed bit. Like, what was that? Just ran across the page. But then I realized this is a much greater, he's going back generations and showing this much greater conversation about fathers impacting sons and humans as machines, existence assertion. This, Hal at the beginning, when we're a year ahead of the book, Hal is desperately trying to say, hey, I'm in here. And, Kate Gompert, we get that from her. Our human weakness for pleasure, which is what I talked about earlier when we were talking about the P terminals. But then the whole commentary on talent and entertainment as spectation and the audience and the whole, the whole ruse of Lyle, the sweat licking, levitating guru in the weight room. There's a whole scene where he's in there dispensing wisdom to people, but then he, I never considered the level at which David Foster Wallace is playing here, and he's concerned about fame and what fame really means. And there's this whole bit about, if let's say that you aspire to be a great novelist, because obviously there's probably some great novelists out there for whom you have really high admiration. Well, in a weird way, what you're trying to do is you want to achieve that height so that someone else will experience the same thing that you're experiencing for that person. So in other words, you want to get to a level at where other people are having the experience about you that you're having about this great person. But David, I can't even really articulate it very well as he does in this book. And he talks about it in some of his interviews, but that was really something that gave me pause.
That's that Lamont Chu scene, right? With Lyle.
That's it. Exactly. I found that to have much greater depth. And then, of course, the loss of connection, the loss of human contact, But then finally,
Hedonia stuff.
Yeah, and how pertinent is that right now with COVID-19 and everything? We're even further abstracted from one another. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm feeling that.
There's a lot of serious stuff in this book.
Yeah, man. And like really traumatic stuff. Like my friend Curtis is reading this book and he was texting me yesterday about, he just read the part where the woman at the AA meeting is talking about her adoptive father.
Terrible.
Putting the Raquel Welch mask on his daughter. And like that, I brought up the PDF of Infinite Jest on my computer and I just like kind of like read through some of that and was just like pulling some of the quotes from it, and we were just like talking about how like viscerally awful some of this stuff in this book is. Like that and a few others like really stand out to me. Were there any that you forgot about in the 10 years and then you read it and you were just kind of more aghast than you remember being the first time?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, there were two. One was from one of comes really late in the book, and it's one of James Incandenza's films.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah,
it's rugged.
That's pretty much all you have to say.
Yeah,
that one was pretty raw. That one caught me off guard.
Yeah. I think I'd forgotten about that scene, and then when I reread it years later, I was like, I don't remember having read this.
Right. I think possible? Because if you're like me, I think that my psyche immediately, my
subconscious,
immediately kicked in and worked to erase that from memory.
Mm-hmm.
But that one, that got me. But another one that struck me that I laughed at the first time and that I found to be pitiful the second time was when Hal ends up at the wrong meeting house
group.
Yeah, and he ends up with the all the grown men hugging teddy bears and so on. The first time I read it, it's hilarious, right? I mean, not only because he ends up in the wrong place, and he's expecting AA or whatever, or no, not
NA,
AA, but
NA, I think, right?
NA, yeah, and and so.
And then we also get the tie back to the helicopter accident and Lateral Alice Moore as being involved in that as well.
Yes. And
like that's why she has her injury, right? Is because of that accident, that helicopter accident.
Yeah, and that was something that I didn't catch. And I think isn't that from a footnote?
I think it may be.
No, actually, sorry. I'm actually thinking she, in a footnote, ends up divulging what may be. Well, first of all, we don't know if Madame's psychosis is super pretty or super deformed the whole time. You know, it's left sort of ambiguous, and it's
the acid story, right?
Exactly. So if you haven't read it or you've read it and haven't read the footnotes, they're pretty important.
Yes, like we are big advocates on this show of footnotes being a crucial part of this novel.
I mean, and I don't know where I was going with that, but I can't recall what character this is tied to. Oh, you know what? Was it Don Gately's mother who was abused by the military officer?
It
won't come to me.
Sounds right. Yeah.
Anyway, the
scenes
he
lined up the Heinekens and like had his tabulation
that's
chart of Heinekens drank per day. Yeah.
That's it. Just what a detail too. What a wretched detail. If you're drawing, you were drawing up a character, that abuses women. I mean, what a wretched detail to give them, that they have probably one of Matt's field notebooks, and they tally. Yeah,
Matt's holding always up field one notes, right?
And they're tallying how many Heinekens they drink each day. It's just this obsessive compulsive type thing. But that really got to me. Which, I mean, that's no surprise though, because any kind of abuse toward women is hard, even if it's glanced at. It's hard to take.
Yeah. Our friend Matt Leader reread Infinite Jest for the first time this year as well, and he was saying that he really hated the inner infant scene on his reread. Like, it didn't stand out to him the first time as much, and the second time he's just like, I absolutely hated that part of the book. Like,
interesting.
It really bummed me out. Yeah.
While we have you, I kind of want to discuss some other books, but if there's anything else you want to bring up from Infinite Jest, hit us with that.
Yeah, and some of it, like I said, I'm actually going to be recording. I'm taking the day off work on Monday, and I'm going to spend time making my video on Infinite Jest for the channel. I'm going to try to give it my best shot. But man, trying to make a single video about a book like this is, it's probably going to end up like The Recognitions was an hour and a half long, and I trimmed it down to 58 minutes. I'll do my best. There's so much that can be said about it. But really, what we have here, this is one of the great books. I mean, part of me hates to say it because I know there are so many ears that don't want to hear it. But it truly is an important book. And one of the things that I jotted down is that this is the anatomy of melancholy for the 20th and 21st century.
I think that's a great line, and I think that's a great comparison, because he clearly was trying to capture something about a generation, right? And about not just sadness, not just melancholy, but something really deep and existential. That I think a lot of people, it resonates with a lot of people, and that's why it's going to continue to be important. And it has been now for 25 years.
Yeah.
So
and like a lot of the sadness in the book seems to be tied to me to like late capitalism. Like this hyper entertainment society, years are corporatized, but despite that, like the really deep human stuff is also so timeless that is dealt with in the book. So it's like a very timely book, but it's also a very timeless look at the human condition.
Very much so. Yeah, I've had one person contacted me and they said, I want to read Infinite Jest, but I don't know a lot about American culture. I can't remember where they were. I think they were in Indonesia. And they said, will I be able to read it? And I was able to tell them, I mean, there may be some references to Jiffy Pop or, stuff like that here and there. But because it does dig into those very serious and timeless and universal issues, more so than, just a bunch of Americana, you will be able to read it.
Yeah.
And now it's been translated into like 25 languages.
Yeah.
So the language is, I mean, it's phenomenal. Like for a long time, it was only in English and Italian and then Spanish. And then it's slowly grown where, that doesn't happen with a book that isn't to have that kind of universal appeal.
Yeah.
I've been seeing on Instagram tons of Russian copies of Infinite Jest lately.
Like I have the Russian.
Do you have the Russian one?
Yeah, I have the Russian one, but the Finnish one just came out.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
But Russia is been interesting. They have long literary history there, obviously,
sure,
with big books.
Sure, yeah,
and some of the best writers.
It's been interesting to see their uptake on it, because I also think there's something about these like really miserable countries that it resonates with them. like, well, it's really cold and terrible to live here, just as much as I'm depressed in this book. Like you don't see people like laying on the beach of like, wow.
Yeah, sure.
Sucks, but anyways, that's not true. But the
you went too far.
It is coming out in Greek. It is coming out in Chinese.
Wow.
So they can translate it into anything.
Hebrew is being worked on. Farsi is being worked on.
Your Indonesian friend will be able to read it in his native language.
That's amazing.
But,
wow. I didn't realize. I did not realize it had been translated into so many languages.
So yeah, I really love in your videos, Chris, where you are sitting there perusing Bottom's Dream. and like,
boy, can you ever ID with that? Hey, Matt?
Yeah.
So I have it over here in the background, and like I used to just get it out like as a prop, sometimes.
Yes.
It's like it's a great prop of like this is by far the longest novel I've ever owned.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I will even if I had like infinite amount of time, I don't know that I would read it.
That was part of the gag too. You know, I've got this very serious look on my face. And I've got bottom stream I'm leisurely kicked back in my chair.
The other funny thing is, like, that book, when you do read it, and I've made a couple of attempts of really, taking notes and trying to track characters and language and stuff. It's just super, like, dirty book. Like,
really?
It's full of like body sex jokes and just like long pornographic sections.
What's this book
and
called
if you
again?
think about it, like,
where can I find
it? Good luck buying it. It's called Bottom Stream by Arno Schmidt, and
available at Barnes and Noble.
Right. It's not, but it was taken from the Midsummer Night's Dream, right? It's a Shakespeare reference, and Bottom Stream itself, like, body for its time, but Arno Schmidt, being German, took it pretty far. The other cool thing I think about that book is that it's all set in like a day. It's like a 24-hour period.
Oh yeah.
And it's really like a dream that is within a day.
Right.
Or
so
one night. I don't know if we've ever discussed this book in too much depth on this show, but it's kind of a running gag.
Yeah, right. I didn't even bother buying it because I'm like, the way you've described it, Matt, I don't think I'm ever going to get through that book.
Yeah,
so.
It's quite a turnoff.
There's another pretty well-known guy on BookTube is Clifford Lee Sargent, or Cliff of Better Than Food. Name. And he and I talked, we did a video chat a month or so ago. And he happened, I don't know how we got there, but he happened to mention that one of the patrons of his show shipped him a copy of Bottom's Dream. And it became clear to me that he didn't know a whole lot about it. So I grabbed my copy and I held it up, and his eyes, they turned into saucers. And he looked at it and he said, "I've got to read that." And he said, "What is that? What are you holding?" You know? And, I said, this isn't going to be just, this is going to be like anything you've read before. I mean, Arno Schmidt pushes everything beyond the limits. I mean, the syntax, the punctuation, every word can be read 4 different ways. I mean, it's
the other really crazy thing about that book is that the translator, John Woods, who he worked on it, for like 20 years, is that it's so complex to translate that he was also the typesetter. So like you couldn't just like deliver a Microsoft Word document in this book.
No way.
It's got 2 columns plus 2
marginalia
columns with images and like multiple languages and footnotes, and like
it's unreal.
Everything is sort of superscript.
It's just the Book of Kells, basically. Like a medieval monastic gold plated document.
Honestly, he's got this thing where in a single word he'll have multiple letters in that word stacked on top of each other so that the word can be read. You can go with the superscripted or the subscripted letters in one word and read it 2 different ways. Like, for example, one of the titles he takes from Wagner's Ring Cycle, and you can either read it as the Twilight of the Gods or the Toilet of the Guts.
That's awesome.
The book was published by Dalkey Archive Press.
Yeah,
and Dalkey also published some
Rest
of
in
his
peace.
collected stories, which the stories are a little more straightforward. The other stuff Arno Schmidt had written is not as bizarre or complex as this book. But yeah, I had the good fortune to talk with the founder of Dalkey Archive, John O'Brien, many times. And, at the time that press was housed here in Texas, in Victoria, Texas, University of Houston, Victoria. And John Woods came to Victoria for the book launch. And, John O'Brien had told me that the grant they got to published the book. It's co-published with a museum in Germany, and they got money from, I believe, the German Arts Council. Was enough to pay for like one print run, and that's it. It was never.
What's the MSRP
I don't know
on
that
it?
it can't.
What did you pay for it? Do you remember?
I think, unbelievably, the retail price was $50.
Oh my goodness, that's hard to believe.
And it should have been like 200.
Yeah.
And, for sure.
And I know a couple of people who bought multiple copies of it, and I regret not buying multiple copies, because I think they only printed like 2,000. Like, it's a very small print.
Wow, that is.
I paid $135 for mine.
Yeah, it's going to go up, and it's worth that because they're so hard to find. And like as Chris just alluded to, John O'Brien passed away in November, and Dalkey Archive Press is now kind of an imprint of open letter books in Rochester and Deep Vellum here in Dallas, in Texas and Dallas. And anyways, it's great that they are keeping all of Dalkey Archives books in print, but that one, it's gonna be tough. And it's same, like, I can't imagine trying to read it on like a Kindle.
Oh no,
like you couldn't do it.
You'd fry your Kindle would fry immediately.
Another one I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, Chris, was I mentioned in my year in review thing that in 2020 Stephen Moore published his notes on Alexander Theroux.
Yes.
And really through Stephen Moore have I gotten to be able to appreciate Alexander Theroux more, and to spend more time with all of his books, really. But the big one, again, like Bottom Stream is out of print, is Darkenville's Cat. And I know you did a video, you did a review of Darkenville's Cat. First, give us your 10, 20 second pitch on Alexander Theroux, and then Darkenville's Cat in particular.
Alexander Theroux is one of these people who, just lives and breathes dictionaries. And when I say dictionaries, I mean all of them that have ever been printed across all time, apparently. He's just got one of these freakish, it's just this freakish ability to consume words and then regurgitate them in a very creative way. And Darkenville's Cat is of course, and always will be, the pinnacle, the showcase of his abilities. And Stephen Moore talks about that, that for him, that's still the gold standard. And I agree with that. I actually came to Alexander Theroux by way of Stephen Moore in my back pages. When I was reading through my back pages, he got me interested in Darkenville's Cat, and then I saw it was out of print. And I think I had already probably bought Bottom Stream at the time, so my book funds were spent. But I actually, last year, I read almost all of Theroux's oeuvre. I think I read everything except the Al Cap monograph. And, I even got a standalone copy of Theroux Metaphrastes, his 30-page treatise on his approach to art, which is the only things that the two that I highly recommend are Theroux Metaphrastes, so you know what you're getting yourself into, and Darkenville's Cat. But I read them in chronological order and saved the cat for last. Right. It's something that I often do when I'm coming to a new author, whatever is heralded as their magnum opus, I'll save that for last and read through everything else chronologically. Kind of like with McElroy, I'm reading everything chronologically and saving Women and Men for last. But anyway, Darkenville's Cat it's curiously readable because he doesn't, for all of the mystique around it, he's not bending things or bending traditions of novel writing the way that like a Pynchon text would. It's very, very straightforward and has a very easy to follow story. It's not one of those where there's going to be some critical plot thing buried such that you won't find it until your third read. Not at all.
Like Infinite Jest, you mean?
Yeah, exactly like Infinite Jest. But it's very inviting. But it rewards over and over the lover of language and the lover of just literary texts. I mean, it is unmistakably by someone who just loves literature. He did his PhD on the emunction of language in Samuel Beckett, which emunction means to sneeze. So the title alone gives you a hint at Thoreau. Yeah. So, really, the story, the characters, Dr. Crucifer rivals Ahab for best literary villain. I'm not really sure what else to say, but that was a highlight.
Matt, have you read Darkenville's Cat?
No,
I haven't either.
Long story, but I have some of Thoreau's other books that are kind of hit or miss for me. Honestly, I don't know if that's the accepted case or not. But like Laura Warholic, very interesting, strange book. He has a book called Three Wogs, very strange. But I think what you're getting at is like, there's actually drafts of Darkenville's Cat in the Ransom Center. You got to come down here, Chris, and see drafts of the Infinite Jest and read. He actually has a book. Thoreau has a book of essays that has never been published that resides in the Ransom Center. But that language that you're saying, like, that's what keeps you engaged, or I think that's probably a talent that I look for in writers in general, is like at the sentence level, what kind of vocabulary do you deploy? How are you constructing those sentences? It's a real craft question. Yeah. And you can tell those people, like you say, who are just steeped in all these traditions of language and, lexicography and learning, and you're going to learn something almost on every page.
Right. Exactly.
And yet it's still readable, still enjoyable, still story. I'm curious about your word list too, because I noticed you took a lot of words from even from Novel Explosives. Like you learned, you have a long list of your method. Do you want to talk a little bit about your reading method? Like I know you probably get questions too from your viewers about, do you use sticky notes and take them out right in the front of the book? All of that, like.
Oh yeah,
you usually do write down the words that you learn. Like it seems like you enjoy that part of it.
Yes, I always use the title page to write down all the words that are new to me, or with Darkenville's Cat, the front and back of the title page. And I don't remember when that started, because I used to be horrified at marking in my books. And I'm still horrified at cracking the spines, even though, contradictorily at the cracking when I introduced myself, I said that I wear out spines. But that's actually
wearing them out and cracking them in half is different. Yeah.
Right. It mortifies me. Of course, now Infinite Jest, it has a nice little crease running through it, so I'll probably buy another one. But I try to I'll keep a reading copy of a book that I really, really like. I'll have a hardcover if I can, and then a reading copy that I don't have to worry too much about. But anyway, the interiors used to also be sacrosanct. And but then I don't know where I first got the idea, but it just so happened that I realized that it brought me more into a conversation with a book if I started to not just underline passages that stood out, but make a little note, like, what is it about that stood out? Like, can I, even if I can't articulate it, I'll put something down, like, a question mark. And a question mark for me in the marginalia means I'm not really sure why this is standing out to me, but I don't want to, bog down my reading experience and sit and figure it out. I'll come back to it. So the first time I read a book, I want to read it. I want to experience it. I don't want to linger too much. I'm not going to try to get every single plot point. If I do have one of those reading sessions where I honestly can't recall anything that I just read because my mind wasn't engaged, then yes, I'll reread that.
Yeah.
So, I flag every page with a little post-it flag. I underline, I take notes in the margins. But the first time is I'm trying to glide through it at a pretty good pace. I want to get, the taste, the flavor of the book. And then the second time is when, I'm going through it. And just by the nature of a second read, you'll start to see the connections that you didn't see the first time because you lacked the memory of the book at all. And it's on that second reading when I really dig in, and that's when I go to, a journal, and I have my journal off to the side, so that I can make diagrams, genealogies if I need to. If it's a Latin American novel, then I'll probably need to make a genealogy because everybody's going to have the same freaking name.
Or Russians do that a lot too.
Yeah, Russian with all its diminutives and everything. 7 different names for Alexei.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
if I'm reading Dostoevsky, I'm going to have my charts of characters and everything. So for a while, I did try to do like a color coding system, and that just got too cumbersome. I tried to be clever, like this color highlight is for imagery that I really liked, and this is for an idea that was really thought provoking. And I said, you know what, this is absurd. And so what I do now is I use one color ink for each read of a book. So the first time I went through Infinite Jest, it seems that I used a red pen. And so my marginalia and highlights and underlinings are in red. And so the second time I went through with blue. And that way I can also see how my perception changed and things like that. But I'm not sure what more there is to say about it.
No, I'm just curious about that, and I think you answered my question, and I can really relate to that now. What changed for me, I'll say, is whenever I was reviewing books really regularly for Publishers Weekly, and they would send to galleys, and you would have a really tight deadline, and your review would have to be really short.
Yep.
And, these galleys are kind of cheaply produced, and they're not like something you would want to just like put on the shelf and worship. It's like it's produced to just get in your hands as quickly as possible.
Yep.
And these reviews would have to be like, it's like a capsule review, right? So if you said, a divorced dad in a Ohio suburb travels to Virginia, each one of those words in the review would have to be backed up with a page number citing for fact-checking purposes where like, is the dad really divorced or is he separated? Mm-hmm. And so the fact that I knew I would have to write a review and citing individual page numbers, of like, I'm going to have to do this where I really liked the ones where they would put like 10 blank pages in the back of the book.
Yes.
I would use all of those blank pages to just fill it up with like citing page numbers of really factual stuff, and then developing some other system for just like circling words I liked or whatever. But
that's interesting you bring that up, because I guess I should say that when I do when I have done books for review for like in Rain Taxi, I have a handful of reviews, and I do have to adopt a little bit different system. Especially because with Rain Taxi, there's a 500 word limit, and some other places different word limits, like you're saying. And then it does, because you have to cite everything, back everything up for the fact checkers. And so what I'll do in that case, and actually this is pretty good practice, but at the end of every reading session, every time I sit down with the book, right behind it, I will try to type out or write down just in summary everything that I've just read. Including, it's almost just like automatic writing, just everything I just read, the plot, the way in which people are related, all that type of stuff. That way I have sort of a précis of the book, that I make my own cliff notes as I go along, I guess you could say.
That's cool.
No, I think that's a really helpful strategy. And, you talking about writing reviews for Rain Taxi. You have written one other introduction or afterword to a book that I know of, and that's the Rick Harsh book. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so that is Skulls of Istria.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I've only discovered Rick Harsh through various other people on the internet, like yourself.
Yep.
And maybe Jim Gower. So How did you discover him? And talk about his Eddie Vegas book.
Yes, so the Manifold Destiny of Eddie Vegas. That was the third book of his that I read. I, of course, everyone that I've met, just about, except for my connection at Rain Taxi, that connection predated my YouTube channel. But everyone else in this whole literary sphere has all come out of the YouTube channel. So it's pretty wild. Because here I was beforehand thinking, what does YouTube have to do with the literary world? And here it has brought me in touch with all these people.
All these guys.
Yeah, all these guys, these Dave Lairds and Matt Bookers of the world. Yeah. And so again, Rick, that connection came through the channel, and I had Skulls of Istria sent to me from Riverboat Books at the time. And I thought, oh, this looks interesting and sounds interesting. Defrocked historian, rambling on. And I sat down with it and I loved it. I thought the language was sweeping. It reminded me of a mix of Henry Miller in Black Spring and Dostoevsky's Sick Man. And so I just wrote up a little Goodreads review, and then Rick contacted me and said, just loved the review and wanted, and then little by little, that led to him wanting to do an edition with me in the afterword. But the Manifold Destiny of Eddie Vegas, when I found out that Rick Harsh had a book that was over 700 pages, that was a no-brainer for me. I wanted it.
Yeah, he's got a pretty interesting Instagram presence himself.
Yeah.
And he, I was going to say, Riverboat Books, like, I know you've talked about Mad Patagonian on your channel before.
Yeah.
And I have kind of a different take or opinion on that book.
Yeah.
And I would say, less enthused about that book than you are. And that's partly due to the way that this book, for those who don't know, this book's called The Mad Patagonian. And it's a big book. I don't know, like 1,000 pages.
Yeah, 1,200.
Something like that. And when it came out, the publisher, Peter, he was like trying to present it as this translated work by this made up Cuban writer. And he even had this like photo of the Cuban writer with Bolaño. And I was like, no, that's not this guy. I know who that is. Like, why don't you just like say you wrote this book? And I was like, that the whole thing, I had a long back and forth with him, and it actually kind of like bothered me to the point where I was like, man, you could be charged with like cultural appropriation or something here. Like, I get that you're trying to be clever. He did the same thing. Anyways, all of that put me off onto like, I didn't expect it to affect my reading of the book. I was like, no, I'm a professional reviewer. I can go and just review this thing. And it was like, actually, it does matter to me if you tell me the author is a Cuban immigrant or a national or as a woman, or like, it does matter to me. I can't just read a book in a vacuum of
just the text,
not caring or knowing anything about the author. Like it does impact it to me. If you say this is a true story or this is a first time novelist, or something about it. And that surprised me. That I got so worked up. I'm still worked up about it.
Yeah.
Like years later. But your take was different. By that point, Peter is like, he's the writer of the book.
Yeah.
Like, is that how you approached it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I didn't know anything. I went in, and when I didn't know that both the author and the translator are made up, by the way. He has like a 50-page introduction by the translator of the book. And even
that's all fake.
You're right. It's all fake too. And when I found out, because I was so in the mode of thinking of it as a Spanish novel, I immediately thought, oh, Cervantes, Don Quixote. This is what he's doing here. That's just where my mind went, because we're presented by Don Quixote being this work that's been found and translated from the Arabic by, and And I thought, oh, okay, this person's taken a cue from Cervantes' Ruse, and that's kind of where my mind went with it. I don't know. Yeah, it's when it comes down to it, I love to read so much. I was just talking to someone about this the other day because they basically just told me that I love everything. They're like, everything you read, you love. There's nothing that you don't like. So, they could be part of that too. I mean, there is something. Just the act of reading is something that I really enjoy. Just to sit down with just about any book and spend time with it. So.
I think you're just a nicer guy than me.
Or maybe
more of an asshole.
Yeah.
Well, we've definitely established that in the last 58 episodes.
That could be.
Matt, but Chris has had less time to show his true colors on our show.
No, I know we're over an hour, so I have kind of a final question for you. Knowing that like people who listen to the show, obviously like David Foster Wallace, we have a lot of the same tastes. You've read so much. Can you recommend something to people like us who like these big books? Maybe it's something like Mad Patagonian or the Rick Harsh book that most people haven't heard. Or is there, recommend us something based on what you know about us, because you know what we like, basically, reading wise, not personality wise.
Well, there's Paul Anderson's Hunger's Brides, which I talk about I think I talk about that in my Books to Keep Defeating Me video, which is probably not a great way to recommend a book by saying that it has defeated me, and that's actually a Canadian author as well. I've realized
Paul P-O-U-L, because there's a science fiction writer named Paul.
No,
Anderson.
I think it's P-A-U-L. And I'm pretty sure it's Paul Anderson, but it's Hunger's Brides. It's a novel of the Baroque. It's a Baroque novel, and it's very.
That sounds hard.
It's big, it's physically big, and it's also very long. And like I said, it's a Canadian author. So I realized not too long ago that my knowledge of Canadian literature is really abysmal.
So is mine, man, to be honest.
Yeah,
I live here.
So. Yeah, I mean, isn't the Life of Pi guy Yann Martel? He's Canadian, right?
He's Canadian. Yeah, I think Montreal based.
Okay, yeah. So there's like Yann Martel and a couple of others.
I have a recommendation for you. Then I'll throw one at you, which is an experimental guy from the 70s who's written a wide variety of stuff, some of which got compared to Wallace, named Leon Rooke, R-O-O-K-E, and he wrote a really interesting book from the point of view of a dog that's owned by Shakespeare. Shakespeare's dog.
I love it.
But he's also written some more traditional novels. I don't even know if he's still alive, but he was big with like some avant-garde American writers in the 70s. Anyways, Leon Rooke, if you don't know him,
Leon Rooke.
I think he's one of the better Canadian writers. Anyways, keep going with your. I don't know this book, Hunger's Brides.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look it up.
Okay, good. We've each started off with a book that the other doesn't know. That's pretty good. Yeah. Speaking of Leons, I would say Leon Forrest, Divine Days.
It's on my list.
Yeah, so that one
on my list,
is woefully underread and underappreciated. All of Leon Forrest, really. I'm actually getting ready to undertake doing a long essay on all of his work later this year. But I'm just looking at my shelves here, trying to look for something that you guys may not know.
They're glorious.
Yeah. Here, I'll get my face out of the way.
No, let me rephrase it.
Sure.
Let me rephrase it, Chris. Just in general, we come on here and talk about books all the time, and like people don't need to hear us recommend Don DeLillo, right? Like they're gonna know, like, oh,
right, right,
that guy's good. But like, what are some other writers who you think deserve more attention?
Oh, well, I would say Russell Pearson did The Way of Florida, and this book the writing is gorgeous. I mean, I don't use that word a lot, honestly. It sounds antiquated and a little strange even when I hear myself say it, but that's really the only word for this type of writing. It's gorgeous writing. Jean Giono, this is an older French writer, and but
that he's Italian. Is he not Italian? Is he French?
I think he's French, even though he does have the Italian last name. I can't remember how that came to be.
I'll just tell you, I got assigned to read one of his books for Publishers Weekly, and I was like, fucking hated it.
Oh, which
book was only, man, it was really short. New York Review of Books, and it was a green cover. I'll dig it up, but it was like,
I hope you're not talking about Melville.
Book. No. I would read that. Anyways, I read one of his books. It took me forever to read. And I was like, I had to force myself, like, gun to my head, read one more page. And I was like, oh, Jesus, I can't do it. Anyways.
Well, I can tell you that I'm a big Melville fan. I love Moby Dick. That's my favorite American
I got a Moby Dick
novel.
Shirt for you. Look.
Oh, look at this. This is unbelievable. Look at that. I don't know
if you can see it.
Yeah, that's from the Penguin paperback, right?
It's Rockwell Kent's illustration.
Yeah,
I have an embarrassing admission that I've never read it.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. But anyway, Jean Giono, he was actually the first person to translate Moby Dick in French. So the French have read Moby Dick in their language because of Jean Giono, and as part of it, he spent so much time reading Moby Dick and just kind of letting himself be hypnotized by Melville that he's told the publisher he wanted to write an introduction, and the publisher said, you know what, have at it, do whatever you want. And he ended up just kind of going crazy. And the result of it was this slim book that we now have as Melville. New York Review of Books put this one out too. But it is unbelievable. It's exactly what you would expect of someone who has gotten intoxicated on Melville to write. So that,
I love it.
That's a small one. I mean, just recently, Library of America brought out the short fiction of Brees DJ Pancake.
Not a fan.
Yeah, so yeah, sure. And this is minimalism. I mean, this is more in the vein. He said in one of his letters to his mother that if it weren't for Sherwood Anderson, that he would never have written anything. So this is definitely more the lineage of Sherwood Anderson through Hemingway, through Carver, the non-Lycian Carver, that is, or sorry, the Lycian Carver, not the non-Lycian Carver. But yeah, so this is more minimalism and regional color, mountains of West Virginia type thing. But
it's good, Chris. I really appreciate this, and I'll tell you what. Here, I will hold you to it. That if you think of more, do a video about it, and we'll just watch a video.
Cool.
And
like top 10 sleeper hit novels that you probably haven't heard of, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot here today, but like this is one of the benefits for us to do this show is like hit me with something good, and like you never know when you will read something that is life-changing or change your whole point of view. So I appreciate you doing this, and I appreciate you being on the show. I know we're running quite long today, but
and I feel like we've just only scratched the surface of all the stuff that we could talk about with you, Chris.
Yeah.
Like I said, the kindred vibe is strong here.
Well, based on you doing the time, taking the time to reread Infinite Jest, I want to thank you for that. Like thank you for being so prepared. Mm-hmm. Like I say, you're always very thorough. And I really do like that you have eclectic tastes, and you read a lot of the canon. You read a lot of, new stuff, small publishers, independent stuff. I really like it that you do have such broad range as a reader, and I really do like all of your other fans on YouTube. I do look forward to new videos from you. So thank you for sharing your passion, doing what you do, and thanks for taking the time to come and talk to us directly about this, because it's kind of almost bizarre to see you like in your environment, not doing a video but talking to us. Like, it's a crazy like alternate reality. But it's really been awesome, man. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. This is a real privilege.
Oh man, awesome. Thank you. And Matt, where can folks find us if they want to connect?
Work Concavity Show on Instagram and Twitter, and our Gmail is concavityshow@gmail.com. Since we last published an episode, we did get several people email us, and that's really awesome. We really do enjoy getting that kind of feedback, because unlike YouTube, you can't leave a comment here underneath your podcast. So the comment system is really like comment on our Instagram or Twitter, but also if you don't want to fit it into a tweet, email us. We do appreciate that. That's where people can find us, Dave. I think we have a Facebook presence, but I never look at it. So.
It's minimal, but we're there too. Send us a message through Facebook if you want to. Awesome. Well, thanks again so much, Chris, and thanks as usual to Robin O'Neill for her art and to the band Parquet Courts for their song Instant Disassembly. This has been episode 58 with Chris Villa. Chris, thanks again, man. It's been such a pleasure, and we look forward to all your future amazing videos and more conversation in all the back channels that we can get.
Yep, me too.
Catch me now as I sing. Into darkness, I thought to be extinct.
Oh, we don't have to like actually start right now, but we also could. I suppose.
You can trim. You can trim the beginning.
Yeah,
I'll do a picture.
There we go.
This is like the hot shit in podcast production of this Riverside. And I just sent the link to Dave,
this is slick.
and he's like, "No, we're gonna just do it." And I was like, "Okay, so fingers crossed."
yeah.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm thrilled to be your maiden voyage.
All right.